Safety Executive and Kent Police are investigating the death of Matt Cranch. Officers are also appealing for mobile phone footage of the tragedy to help piece together what happened. So the question is, should these events be allowed to take place, and how much risk assessment would have been carried out at an event like this? Let's talk now to Julie Riggs, who advises companies on complying with health and safety laws and managing risks. Good morning.
Good morning, Tita. Good morning, John.
Morning.
Thanks so much for joining us. So talk us through, Julie, if you will, what happens when an event like this is staged? Who checks out whether what this company were planning to do is safe or not?
Well, this is quite an interesting detail with regard to who actually checks the risk assessments out. Invariably, this is very much done by local organisers. They would be involved in planning the event to understand how they're setting the event up, how they're going to set the equipment up, check the equipment, and also ensuring the competencies of the individuals that will be doing such performances as well. In the past, very much the local authorities and the HSE would have taken quite an active role in this, but with our dwindling number of inspecting officers, this now very much falls on the responsibility of local organisers. And very much they would have been responsible for trying to assess that type of information.
And what is, so when you say local organisers, who exactly do you mean? In this particular case, who would that have been?
Well, that would have been the event organisers, and certainly the stunt companies themselves would have been very much involved in understanding those risk assessments, understanding how to identify what would have gone wrong in this case. And what's quite interesting with a lot of these types of risk assessments is the dynamics and how they change. So the activity that you're doing, as you move around the country with this type of activity, what is changing on those different events? And clearly, whatever control measures they had in place, something has failed along those lines.
So I guess you would say the important thing is that you get someone who is fully qualified, who is an expert in health and safety, to come along, and it's not left to local organisers. Is it your fear that that is happening more and more, that it is being left to local organisers?
It seems certainly to be that way, and the amount of support and competency that's provided as well for such events. There are hundreds of events going on across the UK, and clearly we want to have a balance. We want people to go to events and enjoy themselves. We don't want to be sort of living in a very risk-averse type of society. But there is a need to also understand and balance that. And perhaps our perception of risk has changed. We're so much exposed to it. We want to see excitement when we go and view types of activities. So there's that balance, ensuring that we can still provide that, but also do it in a very safe way as well. So yes, I mean, the HSE at the moment, the government are also talking about cutting 30% of their budget. So we will see even less inspectors out on looking at our events, being proactive, and very much their role is starting to retract to enforcement and sort of a prosecution point of view.
Right, so the other end rather than the prevention end.
That's right.
Right. I mean, the thing is, I suppose, with situations like this, getting fired out of a cannonball is incredibly high risk, isn't it? These kind of events. I mean, you know, people go along to watch it to have that kind of thrill seeking, but it's incredibly high risk. So you can't negate all of that, can you, really, no matter how many checks you do?
Well, there's degrees of risk, and sometimes perhaps our perception of risk is different than the actual risk. An activity like that would have been very highly controlled. They would have assessed exactly the distance of the net, exactly the capacity of that net, the load bearing of that net, etc. So it's very highly controlled. The actual explosions that you see are generally pyrotechnics as opposed to the energy force used to propel the individual. But in this case, something has gone wrong, and that questions what has changed dynamically about that type of activity, or perhaps the competency of setting up that type of activity as well.
Absolutely. I mean, do you worry? We're talking about the tragedy of the individual actually involved in the stunt who lost his life. But if what you're saying, if you follow it through, that there are cutbacks in health and safety, and the officers are not being sent out as much to these kind of events. I mean, we're talking about events that the general public go to here. And that really would be a tragedy if something spun out of control and people lost their lives in that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's how do we reduce that, and how do we educate members of the public, how do we educate people that are involved in this? And often a lot of events, local events, small events, are organised by local communities who perhaps don't have access to that resource and don't have access to perhaps include health and safety competencies within their budget whilst they're setting up these events as well. And that's a concern going forward. So it's how do we address that? How do we ensure that there is a little bit more free access bit more free competencies. And of course, the HSE offer a lot of advice to people and offer a lot of advice from local authorities as well in setting up these types of events. But it's about how we can get people on board. I think there's a very sort of mixed message about health and safety at the moment, that it's seen almost as being very risk-averse, red tape, trying to prevent activities from going on. But actually, health and safety is just about a tool to help you manage and think through these processes, trying to identify some of these risks, trying to enjoy your day and have a well-organised event and trying to avoid these types of tragedies.
Julie, thanks for joining us. Julie Riggs there, who advises companies on complying with health and safety laws.